If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who live in rural areas, in the middle of nowhere, in woods, forests, etc., what are your creepiest stories and encounters out there? So far. My friend was on a solo backpack trip through Yosemite. He started talking to a guy he met about his trip. The guy said that he used to do solo trips often but would never solo again after experiencing something horrific on his last trip. The guy said he was 2 days into a 6-day hike in the middle of desolate wilderness when he came upon a dead man in a suit with a bullet hole in his head, and the body was very fresh. He never heard any gunshots, and he could not see signs of anyone else around. He was filled with dread and felt like he was being watched. He took off, running back down the trail in the direction he came from. He hiked 2 days and 2 nights without rest, then returned to the trailhead. He said the night was the absolute worst. Every noise he heard and shadow he saw felt like something was stalking him in the dark. He told the authorities upon his return and never heard back from them. He wondered if maybe the man was shot and thrown from a helicopter. My friend said he had to stay with a group for a couple nights after hearing that story and even cut his trip a bit short, feeling spooked. When I was around 13, I lived in a semi-rural area that was surrounded by fields that backed onto a small forest. One day, I had a friend come over, and we were playing in the fields. As it started to get darker, we debated if we should go back to the house or carry on playing. We were discussing it when we saw something huge move just along the edge of the tree line by the forest, probably about 200 meters ahead of us. This is England, so we don't have any bears or big wild predators. It wasn't a horse or a deer either. From what we could tell, it looked too big to be a horse or deer compared to the trees beside it, and it looked like it was standing on 2 legs. However, because it was far away, details were hard to make out. We both felt this horrible, sudden fear and strong flight response, so we legged it back to the house. From then on, I never stayed out in those fields past sunset. I've been camping in this one spot in the middle of the Pisgah National Forest in the NC Wilderness for years. September 2017, a friend and I went camping here for a long weekend as we participated in a local paddling festival. He ended up being almost 10 hours late, so I wandered around the wilderness for a while. In retrospect, this feels crazy. I found a giant, and when I say giant, I mean industrial-sized, refrigerator about 10 yards in the woods from where I set up camp. Fast forward, and my friend joins me, as do 8 strangers who set up camp about 15 yards north of us. This wasn't a big deal. When it's Monday morning and we have to part ways, we notice the fridge is gone. We checked the river that was just west of our site, and it hadn't fallen in. The river wasn't swift enough by any measure to sweep it away. We thought that maybe the campers north of us had taken it, but the thing was at least the size of a smart car and inches sunken into the ground. I've gone back since then and am still haunted by the indentation in the ground of the missing fridge. This creeped me and my friend out big time. This occurred when it was late, almost pitch black out, and it was -30°C, so very cold. We were taking back roads to get to a party, and about 40 minutes away, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, a big creepy guy wearing really scrappy clothes was standing at the edge of some forest at the tree line, about 10 meters away from the road. There were no other buildings, vehicles, or anything else around, so I have no idea why this man would have been standing there at this time. This man was scary as duck looking and turned his head watching us the whole time we drove by him, and me and my friend were both freaking out a little because there was absolutely no reason for him to be out there. My husband was hunting alone in eastern Oregon many years ago. He is an excellent hunter, he only kills what we can eat and follows the rules. Even as a hunter, he loves forests and animals and would never kill wantonly. He came upon a man who had 2 baby cubs of the year on a big rock and was getting ready to shoot them off the rock. Their mother was dead nearby. He tried to stop the guy, even though it was possible the cubs might not survive on their own. He asked the guy why he shot the mother bear. It wasn't bear season. No reason. The guy started staring hard at him and asked if my husband wanted to take the cubs' place, at which point my husband backed up and got the hell out of there. Later that night, several odd things happened at his campsite, and he felt someone was in the trees watching him. He got his rifle, his dog, and his equipment, and he again got the hell out of there. It was not a real scary experience, but he got goosebumps for years remembering it, the only time he was really scared in the woods. I've never really had paranormal experiences, but I cannot explain this. I'm in college, and me and some other 7 people from my school went on a backpacking trip, and we had 2 experienced leaders. We drove to Zaleski State Forest, which is in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was early April this year, and it was cold, and everything was still dead from winter. After hiking miles into the forest, we set up camp at the backpacking campsite, and there were a couple other groups of people as well. A few of them were friendly older couples and then 2 college-aged girls. Everyone was pretty spread out from each other. We set up camp farther away from everyone else. I have always been able to sense the energy of places, and the energy in this area wasn't great. It was almost spooky. Each of us had individual, one-person tents, and we formed a kind of cluster on this site, with my tent being in the back, so no one was behind me. Our cluster was also right next to the forest, because this backpacking site was like a big cleared-off square in the middle of the trees. Fast forward, I'm dead asleep around 2 a.m., and I wake up to leaves crunching right behind my tent. I hear footsteps walking in circles around my tent. They had a sort of heaviness to them that couldn't be a deer or a dog, and it also sounded like just 2 legs. I cannot make this up. This creature was circling my tent for long periods of time, slowly creeping up to the sides of my tent and then just stopping for periods of time, and then would move on to waking around the rest of our tent cluster. I could hear a human breathing from the mouth when it was close to my tent, like a light sort of heaving. I was shaking, too scared to unzip my tent and investigate. I kid you not, this occurred for hours, and it seemed I was the only one awake. Out of nowhere, I see an illuminated light shape from my tent, although I couldn't tell what it was from inside my tent because it was all zipped up. It was like a warm glow, and it didn't move like a flashlight would. I was paralyzed in fear. I simply couldn't believe it was an animal. At some point, I fell asleep due to sheer exhaustion, but I could hear the heavy footsteps circling until I did. In the morning, I questioned my fellow campers about it, and my leader admitted she heard the footsteps and noises as well, admitting it was bizarre and she would have investigated had she not been so groggy. One of the boys in the group said he also noticed the light that came on but thought it was someone else. Not a single person in this group went up to go to the bathroom or turned on a light that night. I've heard things about the Appalachian regions being creepy and bizarre, and now I believe it. Some people online have leaned towards Bigfoot because apparently he is associated with light orbs. I've never been a Bigfoot believer, but I'm telling you, this didn't feel like just any animal, like a bear. To preface this, I am a 15-year-old male stocky, 6'2" and 196 pounds, not easily, which isn't a common occurrence in Washington, but it's just standing on a rock, which struck me as odd, not because it was standing. I've seen many squirrels do that, but because it was on a rock, not in a tree, not scared of my presence, and it had beaming yellow eyes. Other than that, though it seemed normal, as I was slightly anxious and tired, I decided to run home. I was only about 500 meters into this trail, so I decided I'd run back, exercise, and all that jazz. I started sprinting back, and luckily it didn't follow me, thank God. But other things started to happen. The first noticeable thing was that it took me way too long to run that 500 meters. I'm not a super athletic guy, but I could run that easily any day, and it's almost like one of those scenes in Scooby-Doo where the hallway will forever extend, except there was no reason for why it happened and I didn't see anything, so I just shrugged it off as me being fat and slow. About 5 or 6 years ago, when I was about 14 or 15, a friend and I were walking in the woods by my house, and we were just on a bike trail. We saw a massive black wingspan going down into a nest. When looking closer to it, it had been a raven or crow-like bird. That was what I could only imagine compared to the size of a pterodactyl or dragon. Massive and impossible size. We ran out and called for a ride home, and both of us completely repressed the traumatic memory until yesterday, when I remembered it and was telling a friend who was thankfully a mutual friend of the both of us. I haven't spoken to the girl who witnessed it with me since we were about 17. But I told my friend that if she called her and only asked if she remembered walking in the woods and finding a pterodactyl, she would know what I meant. She called her up and asked verbatim, "Do you remember seeing a pterodactyl in the woods?" And she immediately knew the exact story in detail, saying she couldn't believe she forgot but remembered it like yesterday. I'm not shocked we both repressed something that's seemingly impossible, but we both saw the same thing at the same time and reacted the same way. A day before I realized this, I had saved many pictures of ravens and crows as tattoo ideas and didn't know why. But when having to unrepress the memory, I felt my heart racing and adrenaline pumping to the point of almost having a full panic attack. I don't know how to research this or where to start. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, and I physically can't let it go or ignore it. Now I need help getting any answers as to what this is, what I should do, or how I should go about it. This happened a little while ago, so say 2 a.m. For context, I live in a very rural area near the mountains with very few people around. I was chilling at my desk playing some video games when I heard 2 loud knocks against my wall from outside. I looked out my window and saw nothing. In hindsight, this was a really stupid move, but I decided to grab a flashlight and head outside to see what I could see. I stepped off the porch and rounded the side of the house to where I heard the knocks. I shined my light into the tree line, and as I did that, I saw something move and heard the leaves violently rustle like something had started sprinting. I didn't really see what it could have been because I was already running away to get back inside. I've had similar things happen with knocks, whistles, and scratching, but this is the first time I've actually seen anything. Any idea what the culprit could have been? Okay, so I've been having a tough time trying to figure this out. The other day, a distinct childhood memory flashed in my mind of me and my best friend and his little brother as kids. We were playing in the backyard when my friend asked me if I wanted to see the cave. I agreed, and the three of us took a short walk through the woods and came upon what I remember as a pretty sizable cave. I also remember us asking each other if we should go inside and explore, but we were all scared. I also always get really uncomfortable, even as an adult, thinking about that cave. So now here is where it gets weird. My friend even to this day also distinctly remembers this cave and us going to it as kids, so years later my friend and I went out in the woods in his backyard in an attempt to try and find this cave, and after going pretty deep into the woods, much farther than we would have been able to go as young kids, we found nothing. The wooded area behind his house is actually pretty small, and walking back there, you would never imagine a large cave opening just sitting there. So I'm sharing this here in hopes that someone can help me figure this out because it seems like there never even really was a cave, but my friend and I swear on our lives that we saw a cave in those woods as kids. Please help. Obscure occurrences, stalked by a creature with 14-inch long footprints. 6 years after their marriage, Diane and Keith Williams found a beautiful house back in their hometown. This house was isolated, and it was located inside a forest, but Keith, being a hunter, and Diane, being a fan of forests, loved this home and ended up purchasing it. Thus, Keith, Diane, and their 4-year-old daughter, Raven, moved into this house in the woods. One night after moving, when Diane was doing the dishes after putting Raven to sleep, she noticed 2 golden eyes staring at her. She thought those were the eyes of a dog and brushed them away. But when she saw an extremely tall human-like figure with the same set of glowing eyes stand near her window, she understood that she was being stalked by something else. When she told Keith about it, he did not seem to believe her. Diane was stalked by the same creature once again, and with time, even Keith caught a glimpse of it. Tracking the 14-inch long footprints of this creature led Keith to a cabin inside the woods. So this is not my story, but it is my friend's story. Aiden and his cousin always went to his grandpa's farm, where it had no electricity or Wi-Fi and was shit like a really old-timey person, and they always went over when they were younger. So Aiden was around 10 and his cousin, I think, was 15, but they were over at their grandpa's one night playing cards or something late at night at 2 in the morning when all of a sudden Aiden grandpa walks into their room wearing huge rubber boots and dressed like Hess working outside. And Aiden and his cousin ask him what's going on, and their grandpa says nothing, he just gestures for them to follow him. And so it's a bit weird being 2 a.m. and all, but they get their boots on and jackets on and follow their grandpa outside. Now the grandpa's place has a forest beside it, and I have a long, narrow path into the forest. And their grandpa was walking towards the path, so Aiden and his cousin asked him what was going on and why they were going out so late. Their grandpa says nothing and just gestures for them to keep following, so they get to the path, and Aiden and his cousin can still see the house a little bit, so his cousin whispers to Aiden that something feels weird and off, like their grandpa not saying anything and they're going down a path into the woods at 2 a.m., which is kind of sketchy. So his cousin told him to run back to the house at 3:2.1. And they just started sprinting down towards the house, leaving their grandpa. Aiden looked back, and his grandpa was staring at them, just standing straight and not doing anything. Aiden just looked forward and kept running to the house. As soon as they got there, they burst through the door. And Aiden grandpa is sitting at the table, reading a newspaper in his pajamas, and drinking coffee. And Aiden and his cousin asked him what he was doing, and he said he couldn't sleep and was just enjoying the newspaper. And they asked him if he took them out to the woods, and he said he just got up. When I was 13, I had this friend named Veronica. We were both obsessed with scary stories and legends. One weekend, she invited me to stay at her cottage. We had lots of fun during the day. We went swimming, hiking, kayaking, and playing video games. When it got dark, we decided to try and stay up all night, but first we wanted to see if the Canadian legend of the Wendigo was true. We waited for it to get darker, and then we told her 16-year-old sister that we were going to go to the forest to see if the Wendigo legend was true. Her sister believed in this kind of stuff but was too scared to see if it was real. She called us insane and said it was a horrible idea. But nevertheless, I grabbed the flashlight in my friend's hand, and we ran to the woods. The legend says that to summon the Wendigo, you must whistle in a Canadian forest at night. Lucky for me, I didn't know how to whistle, so Veronica had to be the one to do it. She did, and then we stood there, as quiet as we could be. 5 seconds go by, 10 seconds go by. We were about to calmly walk out of the forest, but then we heard a twig snap. The snap was followed by a noise that sounded like a moose noise mixed with a human groan. We ran back to the cottage as fast as we could. We didn't tell her sister anything, we just went straight to the room we were staying in. We were bored, so she told me about a legend that was going around the neighborhood. The legend claimed that if you go to the lake at 3 a.m. and tap your foot in the water 3 times, something will try to pull you down into the water. If there's no one there to help you, you're doomed. For some reason, we decided that we would try it. We snuck into the kitchen when everyone was asleep to get some ice cream and coffee in order not to fall asleep. Eventually, 3 a.m. arrived. We did what the legend said, but I only felt something touch my foot. After that, we thought the rest of the night was going to be normal, but boy, were we wrong? We changed our minds about not sleeping at all and got ready for bed. We were too scared to turn the lights off, so we just turned them down, but maybe it would have been less scary with them off. About an hour later, I still couldn't sleep. I turned to Vera and opened my eyes. Hers were wide open. I ask her what's wrong, but all she says is, "Don't look in the corner." But I did. I saw a tall, black figure standing there. I looked back at Vera. She asked, "Is it G gone?" We both looked back at the corner. It was, in fact, gone. "It looks like it," I said. We didn't get any sleep that night. The worst thing was that we had to stay there another night. I grew up in the sticks on the Oregon coast, and I'd ride my bike miles through the woods on these old logging roads. Most had been pretty much grown over, but you could still find a trail, you just had to knock stuff out of your way to do it, so it made a little bit of a racket trip, but it was passable. One time, when I was maybe 12 years old, I was going down this one trail I'd been down probably 40 or 50 times and heard. I don't know, just weird sounds in the woods. Guttural sounds, but melodic, like it was trying to talk but couldn't. Snarling, growling, but not growling. It freaked me out to the point where I decided to turn and head home. And this ducking thing followed me for around 2.5 miles. I absolutely couldn't shake it, whatever it was. Everywhere I went, it would start a few seconds after I started and stop a few seconds after I stopped. If I rode fast, it would follow me pretty much just as fast, even down relatively long, steep hills. If I stopped to walk my bike, it would follow at roughly a walking pace. It was definitely quieter than I was, but I could still hear it. It was creeping through the woods, I could hear it walking, and I could hear it making these same strange sounds that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. I called out to it, but it said nothing, and I never saw it. I finally came back out onto a decent-sized road, and it stopped following me. I never heard it again in the handful of years I lived in that area. I'd seen plenty of bears. The bears down there would take off like a shot when you saw them for the most part. I've heard cougars in the woods before, it wasn't a cougar. I've seen and heard bobcats, it wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't an echo from me moving, the sounds didn't match, and there wasn't much to echo off of. Anyway, it was weird, and I've always wondered what it was. I was just a little kid, maybe 12 years old, when I was riding my bike with my buddy down a dead-end road. There was wood, and we decided to explore. We set up our bikes at the opening and went in. There were me and my 2 other friends. So it was pretty normal to just walk. We found a few old bottles and bricks, nothing really interesting. We were about to leave when one of my feelings called. There was an abandoned house, but it was just a foundation with the brick house broken everywhere. We kept walking to see a completely rusted and crushed car. So we kept walking, and we saw something run past the trees. Being the stupid, curious kids we were, we chased it, thinking it could be a deer or a dog. It was another kid. Hey? I said to the kid, his back turned to us, he slowly turned around, his eyes completely blacked out, and his mouth stretched out. As it grew taller, we heard the crunch of bones as its whole body distorted. I was frozen in fear. My friend grabbed my arm, and we all started running, hearing the extra set of feet chasing us. I didn't bother getting my bike and just rushed to the house. Me and the other 2 were drenched in sweat, panting in front of the house, looking at the empty, dead-end street. We did eventually grab our bikes back, but we never did go back into those woods, and sometimes in a different forest, I hear faint laughter, and the sickening sight and sounds that creature made make my heart race, thinking of what other monsters could be hiding in wait for me. So this is a story that was told to my mother by a friend of hers, and it happened at some point in the 1970s, so take everything with a grain of salt. My mom's friend was living in Illinois at the time with his wife. He had ended up finding out that she was cheating on him, so in what I presume was a fit of anger, he packed all his stuff into a bag and decided to walk back to Louisiana, where he had been living before. He said it wasn't a rational thought, he was just that angry, and he didn't have the money to do anything else. But eventually, he found himself walking down a dark, forested road late at night. As he was walking, he started to hear something walking quite close to him from inside the forest. At some point earlier, he had tripped and spilled cologne that was in his bag all over himself, so he stated that might have been what attracted it. Whatever the case, this continued for a bit, before the thing darted across the road behind him and into the opposite tree line. Now, apparently in between the other side of the road and said tree line, was a large ravine that it must have cleared. He heard it run across the road, but by the time he looked back, all he saw was the shaking of the trees where it had gone back into the woods. He kept walking, and it started following again. He then said he heard what he could only describe as sounding like braying, kind of like you'd hear from a horse. But he couldn't rationalize in his head that there was a horse back there. Eventually, after walking a bit further, he stopped and turned towards the forest. He shouted at whatever was there, "Look, I know you're there. I'm just going to go my way and you go yours, okay?" After his shouting at it, it apparently got upset. He saw the trees shaking in the forest and said it looked like heavy machinery was back there. Suddenly, a large tree flew into the road close to him. The tree was still quite alive and had been completely uprooted by whatever threw it. He wisely decided that the next car that came by, he was going to throw himself in front of if he had to in order to stop it. He stood on the road, and a car came along and stopped. He approached the driver and pointed at the tree in the road and said, "Something just threw that at me from the forest. I'll give you every penny in my pocket," which was about $50, "to take me to the next town." Fortunately, the driver took him up on his offer and brought him to the next town, where he was simply happy to see lights and people. I don't know how true this story is, but I've never known the man to be a liar, and neither has my mom. Either way, it's definitely a spooky one. Okay, so probably none of you will believe me and my friends often hang out in a forest in Germany, Bavaria, and we heard some strange noises recently. Me and my friends often hang out in this forest at night, and we usually talk about stuff in our lives that's happening while we're sitting on a campfire. We've been told often by the people living near the forest to never go in it, but we never saw anything wrong with it until today. We all heard some lady singing, and we checked out where it was coming from, and when we looked, we saw a lady sitting on a tree just outside the forest singing some eerie song we couldn't understand, and then she just vanished. One of my friends also had an encounter with a person living near the forest who once ran towards him with an axe in their hand. I don't know what to think of all of that, but maybe that person and the lady have something to do with each other. We will definitely investigate further. This happened when I was probably 7 or 8. I was sleeping with my mother in her room because my dad worked the night shift. It was a warm summer night, so we had the windows open. Our house is right next to the woods. I remember waking up to the piercing scream of something that sounded like maybe a bobcat or some other similar animal. My mother and I both bolted upright at the sound, and a second later, my older sister darted into the room and jumped on the bed. Then, we hear Wyatt screaming. Whatever had a hold of this animal was big, and it was snorting and chewing as the animal it was killing screamed for its life. Now, I've done a lot of reflecting as an adult on this night, and it's still a topic that pops up when we are talking about freaky shit. The only way I can describe the sounds is similar to a big boar snorting the way it did. The power behind the snorts made me think it was a bear or something with a massive lung capacity. After about a minute of sitting frozen on the bed, we made our way to the window to peek outside and see if we could catch a glimpse of what the hell was eating this animal. We couldn't see anything in the darkness of the woods, but we could hear clearly as day the chomping of the predator and snapping of the bones of the prey. It was just past the tree line, maybe 20 yards away, but it was so loud it could have been directly below the window, and it lasted for a solid 10 minutes. When it finally stopped chewing, that was it. We never heard it walk away. It was like it killed something, ate it, and disintegrated into thin air, or stood there watching us. It was silent, and so were we for a long time, just listening to nothing, too afraid to even breathe. It's an eerie feeling when the forest is silent. You could have heard a pin drop. This thing had to be huge, I cannot stress that enough. A bear we would have heard roaming about the brush afterward, the same for any other larger predator like a mountain lion, and there are no boars in Pennsylvania. It didn't sound like any of those things, though. I have since seen and heard the likes of those animals, and nothing I have ever heard sounds even remotely close to what we heard that night. But that's not even the weirdest part. The next morning, we told my dad what happened, and we all went scouring the area where we heard it take place, just inside the tree line. There wasn't a single twig out of place. There was no evidence of a scuffle, no prints, no carcass, not even a drop of blood, absolutely nothing. With the amount of brush and how large this thing sounded, there should have definitely been some kind of remnant of the shit we heard. There was nothing. So what the hell? Was it a ghost bear? Bigfoot? A ducking werewolf? I really couldn't tell you, but I never ventured too far into the woods after that night. Weird shit happens in the woods at night. A piece of advice: when the forest goes silent, make like a tree and leave. Back in 2021, my mother was dating this man, and he had a daughter aged 19 at the time, and I was 11 or 12, but we went out on a little bike ride in this little forest nearby at 8 p.m. I was in the front, and we didn't have torches connected to our bikes, so we were just riding, but it wasn't so dark that you couldn't see. I was at least 2 meters in front of everyone, so I sped up a little so there was room for everyone to stay close. The youngest there was 7. While I was riding, I heard rustling, but I didn't think much, so I rode another 4 meters, and I saw this figure. It looked like a dog on 4 feet, but its ears were kind of long and its back was arched. I stopped to wait for everyone without taking my eyes off that thing, and it stood up on 2 legs. It was tall, at least taller than me, and its knees were bent backwards. I screamed, hopped on my bike, and rode the fastest I could home. While riding home, I did not stop screaming. I got home, and my mother and her boyfriend were arguing, but they stopped when they heard my scream. I ran to my room and curled up in bed. Now I can't go anywhere at night. But later that year, we moved 2 hours away. My daughter, who was 11 years old at the time, was visiting my parents for the weekend during the summer. They own 55 acres in the woods in northern Michigan. Most of the property near the home is cleared, roughly about 7 acres, the rest has sporadic trees here and there until you get to the back 8 acres. Before it gets dark, they like to sit out on their screened-in porch and watch the deer come out to eat, which was done this night. The plan was to wait till the sun went down so she could practice riding her CT200 Coleman bike. It is a small bike that only went 20 miles per hour, and it had a decent headlight on it, so it was good for the cleared trails on the property. While she and my dad were sitting on the porch, just before sunset, my daughter was watching the open field for deer, but instead, she saw something that looked like a white dog moving very slowly. It was roughly 200 yards away from them, and she said, "Grandpa, what is that?" He looked, and he was very confused. My dad is a man who has grown up in the woods, he knows every animal and everything possible about where they live. He told her it looked like it could have been a white coyote, it had a similar size, but it didn't look like any coyote he had seen. The body of the creature was very thin, almost bone skinny, and didn't have a tail. He went and quickly grabbed the binoculars from inside the house. He looked and said, "It looks really deformed, like a deformed pit bull. It's facing away, so I can't really see its face." It left their view, and they continued sitting there, waiting for dark. When the sun set, my dad made sure to tell her not to go fast because riding at night was something new. He knew that she knew the lay of the land well but was worried since it was her long, skinny arms hanging down against its side. It had the head of a human dying of malnutrition. It had a huge chest, and its rib cage was very prominent. What she thought was white fur was skin. It had white skin with gray undertones. It looked like death. Its eyes were half the size of its head and completely reflected the light from her bike. She was still riding towards it, unable to react due to being frozen in fear. The creature's mouth then became clear. It was really big and unnatural. As she got closer, she started to realize that this creature was very tall, like my dad, who is 6 feet 3 inches. She said the long, skinny arms that hung down to its sides had human-like hands. She started to feel sick and woozy. Then she snapped out of it, turned the bike around, and headed back to the house as fast as the bike went. This event occurred in the early fall of 1971 or 1972. I grew up in the Philly suburbs. The Boy Scouts were popular then, and I was quite active, especially with camping. One of the go-to areas was the New Jersey Pine Barrens, especially along the Wading River and Bass River State Forest. Our patrol was on a weekend camping trip at the South Shore Campground, I think. Lots of pine breaks, but even more swamps. And bogs. And boggy swamps. Our patrol, probably 7 of us plus one guy's dad who drove us, was assigned a 3-sided shelter. The front of the shelter opened to the swamp. If you walked 11 feet from the front of the shelter, you'd be standing in ankle-deep water. And then it just got deeper, darker, and boggier. We mucked about Saturday until late afternoon, made our way back to the shelter, cooked dinner, and chilled until it got dark. And it was crazy dark. There were no other campers around, just the light of our slowly dying fire. We began to hear a slow, splashing sound coming from the swamp. Maybe 100 feet out from our fire. One of the guys yelled something toward the sound, and everything went quiet. A minute later, the splashing began again, but slower and more methodical. By this time, it was within 15 feet of the fire but was out of the fire's light. Here's what our vibe was: none of us were concerned. We were all seasoned campers and figured it was a deer or raccoon looking to score an easy meal. Suddenly, the walking became a slow, steady sloshing. This perked us up, wondering if this thing may suddenly decide to rush us. Our patrol leader jumped up, grabbed his flashlight, and pointed it toward the noise. His light hit something, he yelled, "It's a man!" and ran to the swamp berm. I saw a brief flash of red flannel in the flashlight beam, then heard it splashing fast back into the swamp. The splashing eventually faded out in the darkness. So, what did we do? I tried to figure out what the hell just happened, then crawled into our sleeping bags and fell asleep. Nothing else happened, and we went home the next day as scheduled. Thinking back on this now, it must have been a local piney who knew the area well. The man had to navigate through some serious and dangerous swamps to check us out. The pines have great and eerie vibes, and that weekend held both. I grew up in Orange County, California. In high school, we went out to this place called Black Star Canyon in the Cleveland National Forest. A big, densely wooded area of oak that stretches from OC to San Diego, almost to the border, even contains Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. Anyway, we had been told it was haunted growing up. It turns out, according to the true story, there was a tribe up there that was slaughtered in the 1800s by hired fur trappers because they kept stealing the Mexican ranchers' horses for meat. So we planned a night hike to this place. My friends and I did stuff like this all the time, but I consider myself pretty skeptical, and luckily most of us were pretty level-headed. This area is pretty known for mountain lions too, so we were all on guard and in agreement to turn around at any sign, even if just one of us wanted to. So the way the trail works is that you park at a forestry gate and start to walk along narrow asphalt road that's mostly dirt from when there were sparse houses in the 50s and 60s before the floods washed them out and the land was committed to NFS, eventually turning into a full hiking trail. Along this road is a line of barbed wire as well, with all kinds of signs warning you not to cross. So here we are, typical idiots walking a road on a hardly slivered moon pitch black night after midnight and not using our flashlights to add to the flare. Well, as we go and venture deeper and deeper down this road, which we'd never been on, mind you, I keep seeing what appears to be a cowboy leaning on the wooden fence posts holding the barbed wire. Just kind of leaning on it but distinctly looking at us. I'm talking about a full-blown cowboy brimmed hat, just leaning, but it's just a silhouette out the side of my eye, and every time I look straight on, there's nothing. I'm telling myself I'm logical and pushing it off as a trick of the eyes to keep my cool, but I keep seeing the mother ducker every 10 or so posts, but I don't say a thing to the guys. We get to a point where we've been walking for over an hour and debate heading back just because of the time. Just then my friend goes, "Yeah," and I keep thinking I'm seeing a cowboy along the fence line. I never felt my stomach drop out of me. I couldn't believe it. These were plain wooden fence posts, maybe a typical 4 or so tall with mostly field behind them. There's no way that looks like a person. So I open up about it also, and we all agree to turn around. Just then my other buddy starts flipping out, ripping his shirt off, and screaming about getting stung. We're all kind of confused, looking at him like he's crazy, but he insists that a bee or something just stung him. So we turn out the lights on his back to look and watch as 3 distinct scratches form, stretching from one shoulder diagonal to the opposite hip, even drawing blood. We were done, needless to say, after that, but made it back to the car without further incident. You can probably argue the shadow was a coincidence in the dark and shapes playing tricks, sure, I'll give you that, but throw in the scratch in a way that we watched happen right as we're discussing Ghost Cowboy, and in a way he couldn't do to himself and none of us standing in a circle did to him. Okay, there's something going on. This area ended up being used by Jack Osborne's Haunted Highway in his pilot episode. It's pretty cool, and I've been back since, but only during the day. California has more to it than you'd imagine. My girlfriend, Rachel, and I love to camp in the woods. While our friends would go out and party on the weekends, you would find us out in the mountains, making fires and telling each other ghost stories. That was living for us, and that's why we worked out great as a couple. Rachel's parents had an RV. They let us use it anytime we wanted to stay overnight on one of our camping adventures. It easily attached to the back of my truck, and we could take it anywhere. One Friday night, we took the RV out into the Pocono Mountains. We found a new spot that we wanted to check out. By the time we got settled in, it was almost midnight. We weren't too tired and decided to hook up our Nintendo Switch to the hotspot I brought and play Mario Party. We were about 5 rounds into the game when I noticed a shadowy figure walk by the RV window. I paused the game and blinked. Was I seeing things? It's after midnight, and there wouldn't be anyone out there walking around. But the shadow didn't look like an animal, it was upright, like a human. Rachel said it was probably just the trees blowing in the wind and the moonlight playing tricks on our eyes. That was fine, we didn't question the situation further until we heard the RV door knob twist. It twisted as if someone was trying to open the door and come in. What the hell? I bolted to the cupboard and pulled out an aluminum bat. I kicked the door open and raised the bat violently, ready to swing at whoever it was. No one was there. Just the moonlight and an abyss of dark forest. Maybe it's an animal, Rachel said, trying to calm me down. I nodded and agreed, but thought, what kind of animal knew how to turn a doorknob? 10 minutes passed, and Rachel said she had to use the bathroom outside. I watched from the window as she went behind the truck to do her business. I didn't want anything to sneak up on her. Everything seemed fine until Rachel screamed. I ran out of the RV with the bat, and Rachel was by the passenger truck side. Look, she said, and she pointed at the tree line. There, just behind the closest tree, was a dirty, filthy kid. Maybe about 11 or 12 years of age. He was bobbing up and down and had a wild smile plastered on his face. I raised my bat at him and told him to get the hell away from here. The boy only laughed. His voice was echoing wildly through the mountains. The boy pointed at me and then took his pointer finger and mimicked slicing his throat. He laughed like a maniac and then disappeared into the forest. I told Rachel to pack her things, we're getting the hell out of here. We didn't stop driving until we found the nearest motel to stay at. It was miles and miles away from the woods. And even then, we still didn't feel safe. This happened when I was younger, around 8 or 9. I grew up on a reservation in eastern Maine. I lived with my mother and brother, who was younger. We lived in a 2-story multi-dwelling unit, or public housing. A vast wooded area was in my backyard. It's surrounded by deep woods, and it wouldn't take much to get lost. But I always enjoyed adventuring and was very familiar with the territory. It was late winter, with about 4 to 5 inches of snow on the ground. I heard knocking on the front and back doors at the same time. Around 1 a.m. I noticed it first, and then my mother got up and told my brother and I to stay in my room. She called the police and went down the stairs to see if someone was at the door. We kept hearing the knocking, but as my mother got closer to the door, it suddenly stopped. No one could be seen outside the door, and the police finally showed up. Lights lit up the front of our place. Neighbors came out to see what was going on, as we had 5 neighbors in our MDU. All of them said they didn't hear or see anyone. Police searched around the property to see if anyone was hiding or running off, but they didn't find anything. A cruiser stayed in our parking lot for the majority of the night in case anyone came again. Sunrise came, and the officer had left early in the morning. My mother and next-door neighbor went outside, I assume, to talk about what happened. Then she noticed footprints in the snow that went along the building leading to our front door and back all the way into the forest. But these footprints were strange. It's as if someone was wearing pointed boots in a men's size between 10 and 12. The prints were inverted as if the toes were facing each other, not at an angle or directly facing each other in a straight line. The creepiest part about them was that the steps of the footprints moved side to side. Toes were inverted and looked as if they jumped side to side in a perfect straight line leading into the woods. My mother didn't say anything about them until later in life, when I was older. But I knew they were there, it was obvious. I know what you're thinking, maybe someone was playing a prank or faked it. There were other footprints in the snow around the strange ones, but only around the building. I assume the other footprints were made by the officers due to the fact that they looked normal. But there were no other prints in the snow leading up to the tree line. I followed the prints into the woods. There are no other markings around them, perfectly inverted side-to-side hops or steps in the snow leading deeper and deeper into the forest. I got to the point where an uneasy feeling crept over me. Something was telling me to go back. But I knew where the prints were leading, as I was very familiar with the area. It eventually would have led into a marsh or bog area. I got chilled by that thought for some reason and turned back. I never said anything to my mother about it until later on. I have never heard or encountered anything like it ever since. If anyone has any thoughts or ideas about what it could be, I would greatly appreciate it. This past year, I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. There were about 600 miles of trails I hiked or camped on alone. One of these sections I was alone in was in Northern California, slightly north of Shasta. I got to a beautiful spot and knew it was the best spot to set up camp. It was gorgeous. 360-degree views of woods and the valley below and mountains everywhere. I could see it raining on Mount Shasta. Probably my favorite campsite in NorCal. I still remember the exact mile and have some footage of the site during daylight. I set up my tent, and after admiring the sunset, I went to bed. I could see outside below the vestibule when I was lying down in the tent. As I was trying to go to sleep, I saw a white light in the valley, maybe about a quarter to a half mile away. Not right near my tent or anything. I wasn't close to any towns. In the Sierra Mountains, south of this area, I would see an occasional remote cabin in the woods, so I figured it was that. But there were no access points or dirt roads. No forest clearings. Just thick woods surrounded by mountains. I looked at the light for a bit and tried to think of what it could have been, but this was pretty remote, so I didn't know. I was tired from hiking all day, so I didn't think too much of it. A little later, I looked out again and noticed another light. It was an orange light slowly circling the white light. It was slowly morphing in shape as it circled. I watched it for a long time, trying to understand what I was looking at. It had a very calm motion, and it was almost mesmerizing. It wasn't like a lot of people's orb/UFO experiences where it darts around and then vanishes. I eventually fell asleep. It started raining around midnight, and I looked out of my tent and still saw both lights, one white stationary light and one orange morphing light. I woke up again around 4 a.m. to piss and walked outside my tent, and it was still there. Same motion. I tried to get a video, but due to the distance and darkness, it looked like another shitty video that didn't show anything. I woke up around sunrise and looked for it, but both lights were gone. I didn't see these lights around sunset or sunrise. Only in darkness. I know these would have been visible during sunrise or sunset too. I'm sure there is an explanation, but I genuinely have no clue what I was looking at. I'm still trying to figure it out. Unrelated, but near that area, I was walking, and to the right of the trail was some thick brush. Maybe 5 to 6 feet tall. This was near the Shasta Trinity Forest area, maybe 1 to 2 days after the lights in the woods. I was hiking alone, and I noticed the brush about 100 feet away was being flattened by something, and it was moving very quickly. It was approaching the trail and was going to end up right next to me if I had continued my pace. I couldn't see what was flattening this brush, but it had to be strong. It reminded me of something you'd see in Jurassic Park. I assumed it was a bear, I still think it was, but I didn't want to surprise the bear and have a close encounter. I yelled, "Stop!" And then it stopped. Completely. I remained still and waited to see what was going on, but it was completely still. And it was really quiet everywhere, total silence. I got pretty unsettled and started talking to whatever it was while I walked by. I just kept saying things like, "I'm going to walk by and be on my way, my friend. I hope you're having a good day." I kept walking and kept looking back, but nothing moved from that point onward. Like I said, probably a bear. Black bears are generally like big raccoons and don't want to interact with humans. But I encountered a few bears, and they always ran away when I told them to get lost. After speaking with other hikers, I noticed I met a few people who said NorCal was a little unsettling. The SoCal desert is very windy, and the Sierra Mountains have tons of flowing streams. NorCal doesn't have as many streams or as much wind, so there is just a silence that pervades, which can feel ominous, especially in the dark. That's my explanation for the feeling, at least. But after going through the SoCal desert, Sierra Mountains, NorCal, Oregon, and Washington, NorCal was the only section that was a little unnerving to me. And I did portions of each of these sections alone, too. This happened in Romania, in a rural area. This town is surrounded by big, vast forests on 2 sides and by a big river on 1 side. My father, and his 3 siblings, grew up in a rural area in Romania between 65 and 85. In all that time, they claimed that almost every night and even up to early morning, they saw creatures that flew above the trees in the town as low as 15 meters from the ground level. They claimed they could clearly see being as big as a wolf and had the head of a wolf. Also, they claimed that they had fire in their tail. Now, to be honest, this sounds stupid and unbelievable. Fire in the tail? They did not see any wings. Had the head of a wolf. Also flying above the town every night at distances as low as 15 meters for 2 decades, yet nobody reported it, and nothing could be found in science about such creatures. It seems like an invention, right? I mean, I thought that my father, his siblings, and my grandmother and grandfather were just making up spooky things to duck with me. But my father was very aggressive when I was confronting him about it. Once, he even got so upset that he stopped talking to me for a week after arguing against it. He felt insulted. In 2016, I became good friends with a guy who grew up in the 90s and 2000s in that town. I asked him about this, and he told me that his father and grandfather told him the same story that my family told me. Even the way the creatures looked. Then, after this, in 2017, I decided to go to the town where my father grew up. I asked a few people in the town about it, and all 8 people that I asked confirmed it. Each person that I asked was from a different family. I told them to describe the creatures to me. 6 of them told me that the creatures had a wolf head and a tail with fire and no wings. The last 2 people told me it was like a dragon, but with no wings and fire in the tail. When I asked them to describe the creatures, I did not tell them how they were described by my family. I just told them that I had heard that back in the day there were flying creatures flying above the town, going from the forest to the river and from the river to the forest. And I asked them first if they saw such things and, if so, to describe them to me. 7 out of 8 told me they have not seen any in the last 30 years or so. One of them told me she still sees them once every few months. Which means that by all accounts, including my family, but minus one woman, all people claim that they have not seen them since the late 1980s. One more thing to mention, I was born there in 1993, and I grew up in that town until 2000, but I have never seen anything strange in the sky in all that time. Nothing. However, I was not told about it until I was 10 years old, when we had already moved out of that town to another city. I live in Canada and had never been out of the country until I was 13. When I did leave, I went to a shopping mall just a few hours into the US. It was fun. I bought a weird ball full of some liquid that would deform when thrown against a surface and pop back into shape afterwards. Other than that, though, we were on our way home when my mom's boyfriend got a call from his sister. Her and some of her friends were camping close to the border, and they invited us to come. We wouldn't end up staying the night, but we did go. Once we got there, everyone said hello, and I was offered a pop, soda. The site was located almost directly off of the road, and the fire pit was surrounded by logs to sit on, and behind them was a camper. My 2 sisters seemed fine outside on the fire, but I got bored, so I went in the camper. The only thing of interest there was a ping pong table. I explored the camper and noticed a window with a view showing a river just a bit downhill. Having never tasted river water, I grabbed a cup and went down to drink some. It wasn't great. Turning around to see my sister waving me back, I decided I'd had enough and began my trek uphill. From where I was standing, you could see the camper above and a forest to the left. A cracking of twigs grabbed my attention and made me look over at the trees. There was a figure. It was tall, and I couldn't make out the details since it was getting late. I tried to stealthily grab my phone out of my pocket to grab a picture, and I succeeded. Immediately after I took it, the thing bolted into the trees, and I didn't see it again. I don't know who it was, and after showing my sister, she convinced our mom it was time to leave. To this day, I still have no idea what the thing in my camera roll is. I had just moved into a new area, and it was quite remote. Not totally in the middle of nowhere, but lots of forests and dark country roads with no street lights in the area. To get to Dan's house from my new house was pretty straightforward and only involved a couple of busy main roads, so not too much of a problem, but there were alternative, quicker ways to get there using the country roads that were dark, driving past empty fields and woodland areas, and having no street lights on the road. One night I was at Dan's, and we had to go back to mine for some reason. I think I was staying the night at his and had forgotten something important. Instead of taking the usual route, as it was a weekend night, we decided to go the back way through all the dark country roads. Sometimes when you do this, you find shortcuts that are easier during daylight rush hour, and as we had all the time in the world and I wasn't driving alone, I agreed. We started off driving and chatting, just like normal, but as it was dark, Dan couldn't exactly remember the way we should be going. It wasn't too much of a problem at the time, as it wasn't like we were driving around the Himalayas, just rural Essex. In hindsight, at some point along the way I took a left turn instead of a right, which made us venture further from the main road that led to my house and deeper into the countryside. The roads can get quite narrow, and as we had gone the wrong way, I was forced to drive down a pitch-black road with a slight hill on each side. The road was only big enough for one car friend, and he looked at me, all pale and wide-eyed, so I slammed the car into gear and took off down the road, seriously panicking now. I couldn't see anything in the mirrors, and up ahead was a small bridge that went over a tiny river. I sped over the bridge, and then the road veered sharply to the right. As I took this corner, the entire road was illuminated in my headlights, and it was covered in blood. Literally, so much blood, like that of a very big animal, had been slaughtered there. There weren't any animal remains, but the amount of blood was ridiculous. I screamed, "What the hell is that?" and looked at my boyfriend, who was looking out of his window. I looked at where he was looking, and we could see a faint figure of a man running alongside the car. It is safe to say I totally shit myself and took off at a very high speed. Luckily, we were only 5 to 10 minutes from the main road and miraculously managed to find our way back. As soon as we got to my house, I literally ran in, locked the door, and swore to myself that I would never drive that way again. It took Dan a good 20 minutes to convince me to drive back to his well-lit, busy way, as by this point I was in a bit too much of a state to even drive. It was the scariest moment of my life, and to this day, I don't know what it all was. The vision of the guy running was described as faint because it wasn't just a regular person. I don't really know how to describe it because although it was pitch black outside the car, the person that was running also looked like it was black, but we could still make out the shape. The face had no features, it was almost a bit shimmery at the edges, but was definitely human form, even if it wasn't human. Whatever it was also managed to keep up with my car, which was quite a feat considering I was driving it like a monster truck because I was so scared. There were no trees or anything around for a mile or two, so when we could see the guy running, he would have just been running on grass, but there was something not quite right about it. The vibe I got was that it wasn't a person but an entity, and it was all connected, like the thing we saw running was the same thing that made the noise on the roof of my car and created the blood. Just thinking about it now sends a shiver down my spine. I didn't sleep properly for weeks after that, and even now I hate driving down relatively pedestrianized country roads alone. About 3 months ago, I shared my experience backpacking in the Allegheny National Forest and hearing drumming. This weekend, we returned to the same trail system, Minister Creek. We set up camp at a different site, about 3 miles north of where we stayed the last time. The evening was uneventful, and we went to bed in individual tents around 9:30. About 2:30 a.m., we were woken up by a huge boom. It wasn't a gunshot, it sounded more like a black powder cannon going off. It echoed throughout the valley. We came out of our tents and discussed what we all heard, a little on edge since it was so close to us, but eventually tried going back to sleep. The boom really has nothing to do with what happened later, but it was just a weird night. As I'm lying in my tent, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, I keep seeing shadows on the tent walls. I would swear I'd see a silhouette of a person walking towards the tent, but as I'd look at it, it would disappear as quickly as I noticed it. I decide I'm just seeing things and close my eyes, eventually falling asleep. Next thing I know, I'm being woken up by a young-sounding female voice saying, "Dad, Dad." I jolted awake, unsure that I had actually just heard this. So I'm lying there. Check my watch, which says 5:13 a.m. I'm wide awake at this time, and about 30 seconds later, right next to my tent, I hear very urgently, "Dad?" There was something off about the voice too, it was just creepy. I got major chills, like nothing I've ever experienced. A, my daughter didn't come with us, and B, there were no females in our small group. It's pitch black out, I see no flashlights, no more light from the fire. I'm trying to rationalize what I'm hearing and sit up in my tent. I was thinking maybe a camper from another site wandered into our site, thinking she was at her dad's tent. I unzip my tent, shine my flashlight out, and catch a glimpse of a black bear walking off into the woods. I uncontrollably, at that point, let out a huge "oh fuck," waking up the rest of my group. Bear didn't care and just walked off into the darkness. So, of course, we are searching around with our flashlights and find nobody else around us. This whole experience was just crazy. What did I hear? Do black bears make noises that sound like a girl calling for her dad? Was it a ghost warning me there was a bear at our campsite? Guardian angel? Did I have some sleep disorder-induced auditory hallucinations that just so happened to perfectly coincide with a black bear roaming through our camp? Either way, both of my overnight backpacking experiences in the Allegheny National Forest have been pretty weird. This happened like a week ago. I drove my motorcycle on a street that leads through a forest. I was completely alone, just me and my motorcycle. As I was driving, I saw a rabbit that was jumping through the branches that were on the ground. As I turned my head back to the street, something big, brown, almost black, that looked very much like a Wendigo ran across the road. I immediately shifted down and braked as hard as possible. I only saw it for about 1 to 2 seconds before it disappeared between the trees. I drove away as fast as I could and never came back to the place where I saw it. Does anybody know what it could have been? I live in Germany, so I'm not sure if it was a Wendigo. I'm pretty sure there was a skinwalker on my grandfather's farm. I'm not the type of person to believe this kind of stuff, especially because I'm not superstitious at all, but these two encounters made me doubt whatever was going on this farm. The first encounter occurred when I and my 2 friends were having dinner. Everything was calm, we were eating outside since this was a relatively big space. That was until we heard a woman scream, which was extremely odd since the country I live in is very calm, with very few criminals or even animal attacks, since we were in the wilderness. I'm the first one to react. I climbed to the wall that separated the house grounds from the animal part. From there, I could see almost all the houses near mine. My friends get up right after me. We stay in total silence, waiting for another scream, and we hear it. This time, we could understand what she said. "Help," she yelled, then a bunch of gibberish no one could really understand. One of my friends quickly grabs the phone to call the police, as we assume it could be domestic violence or robbery. I grab my axe, and my other friend follows me to the gate. We didn't leave, nobody knew what we could find, since something sounded odd about those screams. Right before the police arrived, we heard a thud and then glass breaking. I assume it was a window. As soon as the police arrive, the screams stop, never to be heard again. The police find nothing. Later that night, me and my friends stayed up, chatting about what happened. One of them was oddly quiet. When I asked him what was wrong, he simply said, "I've heard those screams before." Apparently, he had heard that woman scream a couple of times while he was walking his dog. The next day we get up and decide to go check the house the screams were coming from, but there was one thing weird about it. When we arrived at the place, there was no house. It was forest terrain, with nothing more than big trees and bushes. We came back and decided to forget what happened, since we wanted to have a good time. No one would relate this encounter with a skinwalker. Obviously, I didn't either at first, but when it happened twice, I started connecting everything. The second encounter happened when my cousins were over. Similar to the previous night, we were having a good, peaceful dinner. That's when I and my cousin decided to go for a little walk in the garden we had. The garden was a frontier with a huge forest, only separated by a small stone wall. We were just talking and laughing when I started to hear a man talking. Not in a normal voice, it sounded like there was something in his throat that produced a weird voice frequency. Again, I go grab my axe, and my cousin calls his sister. We got ourselves near the wall to hear what he was saying. Like the first encounter, we could only understand gibberish coming from him, and he wouldn't stop talking, not even taking breaks to catch his breath. After a while of listening to it, we realized we couldn't do anything about it, so we left and finished our dinner. They leave, and I find myself alone in here. It was quite unsettling. Then I started overthinking more and more, and I remember the times my dog would spend entire nights barking at that forest, when all the existent animals there were wiped out by the hunters. I also remember the warnings my parents gave me when I was a child, to always leave that forest and lock all the doors before sunset. Regardless of my questions, they would never tell me why, because, as I mentioned before, it was a calm little location in a calm country. I couldn't understand why there were so many concerns. It all ended when the lumberjacks came to cut down all the grown trees, leaving the forest pretty visible. Before the trees were cut down, you couldn't see shit in there, even during the day. After they cut the trees and the good weather came, nothing weird happened, and my dog stopped barking at the wall. I would like to know if I'm just being paranoid. So this is a true story. It happened just last night, and I am really confused and don't know what to make of it. I was smoking a cigarette out my window and was in a relaxed mood. I live on a very wooded lot with a lot of wetlands and forest around the edges. I looked out the window from my phone and saw a shimmer from the back of the woods coming out of a trail we have back there, maybe 100 yards away. It looked like something walking on all fours for the first part, then it stood upright and got right behind a very large, wide tree in the middle of the yard. I turned on my phone light, and I believe that's why it hid behind the tree. I quickly turned up my phone light brightness and had my fiancée shine a flashlight out the window, and then maybe 10 feet up the tree, I saw what looked like a triangular head peek around and look at the lights shining on it. It was only for a brief second, but it freaked me out due to how tall it was. I was instantly very scared and shut the window and curtains. Later on, my fiancée woke me up and said she thought she saw someone standing in the tall reeds right outside my window. I looked with a light again but couldn't really tell if something was there because the reeds are varyingly thick. I went back there in the morning and found a picture of a rubber beach ball and a ducking woman's Venus brand razor behind the tree. This is all just very odd to me, and I wanted to see if anyone had any experiences with this. I got one. I was part of a 3-person trail crew. We were a good 26 miles from the trailhead. We were working on diverting the existing trail from an eroding cliff. This new trail was going to be a 7-mile diversion, so we were 5 miles into building the new trail, about another half day until we linked up with the old trail. It's mid-morning, so we decide to take a quick break. I leave my 2 crew members to go answer nature's call, so I am digging a cat hole to go in. When I hear someone whistling a tune, I just assume it's my crew. So I call out that this place is occupied. The whistling stopped, it was quiet. Then it started again, it moved just below where I was. Down the hill a ways, I see 2 men. Both men were dressed in black suits and top hats, carrying canes. Just casually walking in the middle of the wilderness, no packs, no water bottles, looking like they were taking a stroll in a park after an opera. I don't think so and just start walking back to my crew, way freaked out. I tell them what I just saw, and we all go back and just catch them leaving. One of my crew members screams down at them and waves. They ignore us and just keep casually walking until they're out of sight. They weren't using any trails. Just walking in between trees. It was just a weird and freaky experience for all three of us. I don't think we slept much that night. We finished our trail the following morning and raced back to civilization. I just took note of it in our weekly report, just in case those people did get lost out there. A walk in the haunted Hoya-Baciu forest. There were a lot of times me and a good friend were walking in the Hoya-Baciu forest as a shortcut every time it got dark, just to save time, so our parents wouldn't yell at us. I don't know about him, but I was pretty scared some of the time, especially as the forest is said to be haunted, and we had a strange experience where the batteries of our phones went from being pretty well charged, mine around 80% and his a little above 60%, to 0% and closing. We were freaked out, but that only happened once, out of countless others that we walked through that place at night. Once we decided to mess around and joke about it. I told him to go near some bushes to take some scary photos. The next thing I see is the flashlight from my phone stopping and my screen showing the message not enough battery to run the flashlight. Then it shut down. I told him about it. I kept saying that I left my phone with a full battery and there was no way it could discharge so fast, but he kept denying it until I believed so too. I insisted on going back, but he kept on trying to explain it scientifically, like that there is a magnetic field that could have done that. We watched his battery carefully, and suddenly he yelled at me that it was going down. We watched the percentage go down from above 60% to 0%, and when his phone shut down as well, we were left in complete darkness, pretty freaked out already. We started running back on the track we came on, and when I tried to restart my phone to see the time, I noticed the battery was back to normal. I told him to start his phone too, and it happened again. Both our phones recharged by themselves once we got out of the forest, just like nothing happened. Anyway, I believe that if we hadn't joked around about it, nothing would have happened. I took that as a lesson, and since then, I respect that place much more, and I'm not joking around with this sort of stuff anymore. That's it, basically. A memory I'll surely never forget. Let me start off by saying that this is a true story that happened to me when I was about 13, and I'm 27 now. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. My dad used to be part of a small hunting club in Alabama, with just a handful of guys he grew up with. Once a year, we would drive to the small town of Elba to camp for a few days and go hunting. There were a few different areas of land around the town that the club owned, and club members could go hunting there. One of these pieces of land was nicknamed the cemetery because, well, it had an old cemetery on it. There was nothing really creepy about the cemetery. It was in the woods, and the graves were of a slave owner and the graves of his slaves. Now, in this area of land nicknamed the cemetery, there are 5 or 6 green fields. Basically, it is a cleared out area where there are no trees, just grass, and a buck hut to hunt in. A buck hut is a treehouse that you sit in to wait for deer to walk out onto the green field. This particular evening, we were going to hunt on Green Field 1. The plot is directly behind the old cemetery. The evening started off normal enough. My dad parked the truck, and we walked down the trail to the buck hut. We climbed up and started to wait and watch the woods. A little bit of time passes, and my dad tells me that he's going to go for a short walk to see if maybe he sees any deer on the trail. Keep in mind that I'm about 13 years old. It's not a big deal, I've hunted by myself before, and I'm not afraid of being alone in the woods. Besides, it was still pretty light out. So, I said okay, and he climbed down. It was just me, my .32 caliber Marlin rifle, the grass field in front of me, and the dense woods around me. This is where things start to get strange. I sat there for a ducking eternity, or what felt like an eternity, and it was now almost twilight. My concern for my dad was growing because he was still not back yet. I was worried that maybe something happened to him or that he got lost. However, he's an experienced hunter, and if he were lost, he would yell or fire off a shot, but the woods had been dead silent. I figured maybe he found a good spot where he wanted to hunt during the twilight or dawn hours of the day because that's prime time for hunting. So, I focused my attention on the grass field in front of me. I was just watching, listening, and waiting for a deer to walk out on the field as the light of day began to fade. Just then, across the field, I saw or heard some brush moving and breaking. The thought did cross my mind that it could be my dad, but I highly doubted it. No way could it be him. That would be incredibly dangerous and stupid. I raised up my rifle, pulled back the hammer, aimed it at the moving brush, and patiently waited for what I hoped was a deer to walk out. Then, a girl floated out of the woods and onto the grassy field. She was transparent white, with a long, flowing dress and long white hair. She floated from one side of the field to the other and disappeared back into the woods. I watched her for a solid minute or two. I couldn't ducking believe my eyes, and I was petrified. Now I wanted my dad back. A short time passed, and it's now pitch ducking black, and I'm still alone. My concern for my dad was turning into panic, but I was too afraid to yell or go look for him in the pitch black woods, where I just saw a ducking ghost. I sat there for hours, terrified and alone in the darkness. Thankfully, he finally returned. He acted as if he hadn't been gone long at all. I asked him where the ducky went, and he said he just went for a short walk up the trail, turned around, and came back. The timeline made no sense. He was gone for hours. It was unlike him to leave me alone for that long. He was adamant that he had only been gone for 15 to 30 minutes. We walked down the trail back to his truck. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. The whole experience still confuses me to this day. Was the ghost I saw an old slave or slave owner buried in the woods behind me? Something else entirely? Did my dad go through some time warp where time sped up? I don't know. I never went hunting there ever again and don't plan on ever going back. This encounter took place when I was a sophomore in high school. The neighborhood I lived in had thick woods behind the local rec center. These woods had a trail running through them, but if you stepped off the trail, you would find yourself in dense forest with lots of undergrowth, making it nearly impossible to see the trail and vice versa. My best friend, R, and I would frequent these woods to partake in normal teenage mischief, resorting to one specific clearing just a few minutes down the trail and into the woods. We had done this countless times and never experienced anything strange aside from being spooked by local wildlife. On a sweltering Texas summer day, R and I decided to go to our spot. After we hung around there for a bit, we decided to make our way back home. The special thing about this spot was that in order to get back on the trail, you had to walk over a small hill, probably 4 feet high or so. However, as we were climbing the hill, we heard 2 female voices talking about different sorts of weaponry, which blades cause the most damage, and how it hurts more if you sneak up on your victim. We decided to stay hidden amongst the brush for a few moments longer to hear what else they had to say. My heart fell through my ass as we heard them talking about basically how to butcher a human. Seems crazy, but hear me out. For some dumb reason, we just had to see these people. We didn't feel too threatened as it was broad daylight and the trail was usually pretty busy this time of day. We made our way to the path and spotted the people who were saying these things. We saw 2 females. They were wearing brightly colored ensembles, think that little girl store justice, but their faces were, I guess, extremely aged. They had wrinkles, droopy eyes, and just the most unhuman expressions on their faces. We literally could not comprehend what we were seeing. And that's when we made eye contact with them. As soon as they spotted us, they started speedwalking like I've never seen. They kept looking back at us, whispering to each other, and their speed kept increasing. Every time they looked back, we had to see their old faces that didn't match their bodies. So, we stupidly followed them down the trail. We were coming up to a right curve on the trail. There was a tree right on the crook of the bend, and you had to go right as there was fencing right behind the tree. As they basically ran away from us, we watched them go behind that tree, but we never saw them come out from behind the tree and proceed on the trail. What the duck? R and I were terrified, thinking they were hiding behind the tree, waiting for us to walk by so they could do God knows what with us. We turned our asses around and sprinted home. It's been years since this experience, and it still baffles me to this day. My heart is racing as I'm typing this. When I retell this story, I can't shake the unsettling feeling I felt that very day. After reconnecting with that friend, this experience came up, and we both cried our eyes out. Something was very, very wrong. Whether it be crackheads or something much more sinister, I hope to never come across them again. I used to live in the woods, literally in a log cabin. One afternoon, I wanted to go to my friend's house, which was less than a mile from mine. A fairly short, easy walk along a small, paved road, although with lots of switchbacks and turnoffs. Anyway, I stayed at his house past dark, which I was really not supposed to do, but it wasn't the end of the world either. Nonetheless, I realized I better get home shortly after dark, so I started walking. After a few minutes, I became aware that it was getting harder to see, but I figured that no matter how dark it was, my eyes would eventually adjust, so I continued down the road. Soon I found myself in absolute pitch black. I held my hand up right in front of my face and could not see it. This was how I discovered that when you are out of reach of any lights, there is no moon, and the sky is very overcast, you can in fact find yourself with no light at all. I tried to look back toward my friend's house to see if I could see the lights from his parents' cabin. But I could not. Besides, without any point of reference, I wasn't even certain anymore. The cabin was completely exposed to the woods, so I acknowledged that any animals could stroll along if they pleased. But I stayed there for about a week, and me and my boyfriend sat outside on the front deck every night, very late, and at no point felt in danger. It was peaceful, with fireflies out and the sounds of crickets every night. Until the 5th night, it was eerily dark too, the moon was covered heavily. It was about midnight, and all of a sudden I didn't feel peace like I did those other nights. The forest went completely quiet, and I felt a horrible sense of dread. I genuinely feared for my life. I sat there in my chair, looking out into the dark forest, trying to rationalize and calm myself down. It was my mind playing tricks, but all of a sudden, my boyfriend said out loud that he felt unsafe. That's when I realized it wasn't just me. We then both heard a blood-curdling scream, and we pulled out a flashlight to see what it was. It turns out it was a gray fox. They make scary screaming sounds. The weird part was that the fox was running and had its ears and tail down, like it was scared. This was in June, and I read that foxes scream like that when it's mating season or if they're in danger. Their mating season is winter, and this happened in June, so I do believe this fox was in danger or afraid as well, adding to our fear. The cabin has 3 floors, and we were able to climb out of the window and sit on the roof because we wanted to still be outside and relax. It didn't matter how high I was, I felt something truly evil and stayed inside. The only other time I felt something so evil or like someone was watching was when I had a few paranormal experiences at a haunted house. Georgia doesn't really get mountain lions that often. Maybe a bear, but it didn't feel that way at all. It felt unnatural. My family and I had gone up to my grandparents' house. They had 10 acres of land and only used about 1 to 1.5 acres for the house and yard. They had a large, dense pine forest area all around their house. Except for the road to it, there was forest for miles around. They had cut down some trees to make 4-wheeler paths that we could ride on when we went up there. One day, my sister and I were riding out on the paths on some of my grandparents' 4-wheelers. For whatever reason, I think it was to get a drink, but I don't entirely remember. My sister went inside. I thought nothing of it and kept riding the 4-wheeler I was on. Well, about 3 minutes later, I was driving past a really dense patch of the forest. Over the 4-wheeler engine, I heard a loud growl. I heard it clearly to my left in the patch of forest. Thinking it was just a coyote, I looked over towards where I heard the growl. I did not see a coyote. You know that feeling when you look into a forest at night and you get scared something will stare back at you? Well, this happened to me in the middle of the day. What I was looking at still haunts me to this day. I was staring into 2 large, yellow eyes. It appeared that they were sunken into the creature's face. The eyes were probably about 1.75 times the size of a normal human eye, and they were watching me. I could see by looking at the eyes alone that this was a smart creature. I didn't get to see what it was because it was standing in a bush. This bush was very large, probably about 10 feet tall. About 8 feet up, this bush is where I saw these eyes. I couldn't see any other part of this creature, but I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I put the 4-wheeler into drive and sped up to about 55 to 60 miles per hour. I ran inside and did not go back out on the paths for the rest of the trip. No one else in my family saw anything, but I was terrified of whatever it was. Fast forward 6 years, and it is this year. I was talking with my friend about spooky things we had seen. I told him about this story and began to wonder what I could possibly have seen. I did a lot of research on what large predatory animals live up there. It is northern Idaho if you don't believe me and want to go check. After doing a little bit of digging, I found that there were no animals that were 8 feet tall. I didn't believe it because I was skeptical of anything that was paranormal. I checked again and again because I didn't want to believe it was something that no one had ever captured or been able to prove existed. The largest wolf ever found would have only been 6 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. The largest bear might have been large enough, but it could not have fit in that bush. So I began to research any possible creature that it could have been. Eventually, I found one. A Wendigo. It was the only possible creature I could have seen. I don't know why it didn't attack me or why it let me get away. Based on the features I saw, the large, yellow, sunken eyes, it could have only been a Wendigo. What scared me even more is that a couple years later, my grandparents moved out of that house for an unknown reason. They say it was to be closer to the family, but the family was fine, making a long drive and coming up very often. They moved only a little bit closer. It is still a long drive. When I was young, I got used to seeing 5 black shadows run in front of my windows. It happened so often that I would sit there, waiting for them to come so I could see them. Always 5. Always running. Always outside the window. My 2 cousins saw them as well. The younger one could see their facial details and said they looked like little native men. I'm Ojibwe. And I would try to talk to him. When the younger one was 6, he told his mom he would die at 16. A few weeks later, they saw a terrible accident. He told us the dads died, but the moms and kids are okay, which ended up being true. That summer, he saw the 5 little men from my house in the woods and tried to run away with them. He was caught at the edge of the woods and cried. At 16, he developed a terrible case of ulcers and nearly died. They couldn't figure out what was wrong at first, but my aunt remembered his prediction and kept pushing. There's an Ojibwe story of 5 little spirits that help guide us. I learned this just a few years ago. I think they saved my cousin's life. When I was a theatre studies student in the Midlands of England, we had to take our little theatre company on tour around the local rural countryside as part of the practical side of the course. Being a proper London girl, I wasn't best pleased with the prospect of roughing it in a 10-person van. There were 15 of us in the company, but for the sake of my art, I stopped being a silly tart and threw myself in it with enthusiasm. One day, we broke down in the middle of nowhere, and by the time the AA bloke got to us, and in turn, by the time we got to the campsite, it had no room left for us. We had 3 performances locally the next day, and it had gone 8, and it was pitch dark almost. We didn't have many options left open to us. Our director said it would be best if we drove the van into the nearby forest and all slept in the van for the night, as it was too late to continue driving around and we had an early start the following day. We reluctantly agreed. We found a quiet part of the forest that was open with not many trees, and by 9:30, we were settled in the van, if a little cramped and cold. We were all 19 or 20-year-olds, and it was a big adventure. At around 11:30, I was stirred awake by one of my colleagues screaming and another bloke saying, "This is so bad, we are so screwed." To my complete horror, through my sleep-blurred eyes, I saw that our little van was completely surrounded by about 50, what appeared to be farmers, all with homemade torches all burning brightly. I started panicking but didn't scream. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. They weren't moving an inch and didn't have any expression on their faces, not even when we blasted the horn at them. 2 of the guys even got out of the van and shouted at the men, to the total horror of everyone else. Nothing. Needless to say, we were all terrified. Every time we tried to move the van, the men moved a step forward, and then at 1:30, all the men suddenly just turned around and walked away through the trees. We were absolutely knackered, too tired to drive anywhere else, so we took turns keeping watch in case the men came back, but they didn't. I, 17/M, have lived with my uncle, who I'll call Ty, in his cabin since the age of 6 for reasons I'd rather not disclose here. He's always been an outdoorsy kind of guy. Where his cabin is located, it's relatively secluded, with miles between him and his neighbors, which may be why he taught me how to survive should I get lost at such a young age. This didn't happen too long ago. I was 11 during this encounter, and I will never forget that day. At that point, it was obvious I had gotten lost. Maybe I got a little too distracted playing with my handball and wandered too far into the forest. I felt scared looking around, all of it was just trees. And then I fell to my knees. That's when I heard, "Hey." When I looked up, there was a man standing in the clearing. Most probably would have freaked out in this situation, but the guy looked and sounded exactly like Uncle Ty. However, there was an unnatural sense of peace as he smiled at me. Carefully raising an arm, he proceeded to gesture over to a particular tree with a red ribbon tied around its middle. "Time to head home, little one, just follow the ribbons, Uncle's been awfully worried about you." At first, I couldn't move, even when feeling a sense of safety. At least until he spoke again. "Go on now, he's waiting for you." His voice was strangely gentle and smooth as he encouraged me to leave. In that moment, I couldn't quite understand why there wasn't the faintest hint of fear in me, but what I do know is that I felt compelled to obey his words. Casually just strolling past the guy, not daring to look at him or retrieve my ball, continuously scanning the trees for more red ribbons and following them back to the cabin, my uncle immediately charged me as soon as I opened the door. He'd asked where I had been, and the sun was setting. Huh. Apparently I was playing longer than anticipated, and during that time Uncle Ty was cooking some stir-fry. I didn't get much sleep that night, but when I got out of bed the next day, my ball was right beside my desk. During breakfast, I took the opportunity to ask my uncle if he found it, only for him to tell me no. He didn't find it. Apparently he didn't know I'd lost it to begin with. But there it was, placed directly next to my desk, with not a speck of dirt staining the surface. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw in the forest that day. To be honest, it's something I can live without knowing. In February last year, me and a bunch of friends went camping at Moss Park, a county park to the southeast of Orlando. This county park is on a forested island with 2 large lakes to the east and west and 2 extensive nature preserves to the north and south. We were just hanging around the campfire, drinking beers, and smoking pot. Around 11 p.m., me and 3 of the friends decided to go for a walk into the nature preserve to the south. Our destination was a dock on a pond or cove of the large lake to the west. I normally am not the type to go walking around in the woods in the dark. I do a lot of hiking, but always during the daytime hours. I guess being slightly inebriated and with friends made me braver than usual, so we went trekking off into the woods in the dark with nothing but a flashlight to protect us. At first, the trail was taking us through a large swamp, and nothing felt out of the ordinary. Next, the trail entered a thick pine forest. Here, things began to feel a bit different, and in retrospect, it was very quiet, but I wasn't concerned at the time. We got to the dock and started shining the flashlight around, hoping to see some alligators. There were no alligators, no bugs, and no sign of life in general. I thought it was a bit odd, but again, I wasn't too concerned. Then, all of a sudden, something changed. Within a few seconds, all 4 of us said something along the lines of "Do you feel that?" Something all of a sudden felt very wrong. Then one of my friends said, "Listen to how quiet it is." We all shut up and listened. It was insanely quiet. Not a single frog, insect, or bird. Even the wind had stopped. It was the quietest thing I had ever heard in my life. It was like we were inside a vacuum. Remembering this lack of sound gives me chills to this day. Next, we all remarked on how cold it was getting. I started getting goosebumps. It felt like the barometric pressure had just plummeted. At this point, we all agreed that we needed to get the duck out of here. There was a strong feeling of impending danger. Something wanted us to leave ASAP, and we would be in big trouble if we didn't. I was able to feel that all of this energy was coming from across the pond towards us. I think all of my friends could feel this as well, because we were all focused on the pond and nobody was paying any attention to the dark woods behind us. It felt like a charge of energy was running through my body, and I could feel exactly the direction that this energy was coming from. We all agreed that we had to leave and started walking back at a fast pace. The bad feelings were still present while we were walking back through the pine forest. One of my friends actually started crying. I was not too worried, though. I felt like we would be okay as long as we kept walking. Once the trail exited the pine forest and entered the swamp, all the bad feelings were immediately lifted. It was like we had crossed some sort of threshold, and everything felt fine again. I think we may have been run off by a Sasquatch, because I've seen them myself on a few occasions, and I've heard that they can put these bad feelings into people, but we didn't see anything, so I can't say for sure what it was. About 15 minutes after getting back to the campfire where the rest of our friends were, we heard what sounded like someone or something whacking a tree with a big stick one time just across the campground. This may have been related to what happened earlier. The campground host immediately got up and started walking around with a light, as if they were equally surprised by this sound, or possibly this kind of thing had happened before. I had to leave the next morning to go to work, but some of my friends stuck around and went back to the dock during the daylight hours, and they reported that nothing was out of the ordinary this time. I still go hiking a lot, but I am not planning on doing any more hiking in the dark. It felt like we were in legitimate danger, like whatever it was could have made us disappear if we didn't leave ASAP. This happened to my friend, who was working as a police officer at the time. We shall call my friend Tom. Anyway, Tom had just begun working as an officer, and as a result, he got stuck with lousy shifts. Tom worked in a neighborhood where just about nothing bad ever happened, but working graveyard shifts at parks in the area can still be pretty creepy. Usually, though, he would just find a couple stoners hanging out on a swing set. This one night, Tom had a shift at a local park he didn't often go to. It's about 2 a.m., and his only job is to just make sure no one is around and all is well. As he is walking around the outskirts of the woods, he sees one man just standing with his back facing him on the edge of the darkness of the woods. He yelled out to the man, "Hey, you, what are you doing? Come over here right now." The man turned and smiled at him. Then he dashed into the woods. Without really thinking, Tom sprinted after him. The guy was booking it, leaping over branches and ducking under fallen trees like a pro. Tom is an extremely athletic guy, but this man was on a different level. As Tom finally catches the guy, he again yells out to him. The man smiles once again, then books it once again. Tom kept after him but was always a good 10 to 15 feet behind this guy. Finally, they reach a clearing in the woods. Tom's adrenaline is running low, and it's taking all his power to keep screaming for the guy to stop. The guy turns and smiles once more. The guy books it over a hill, seemingly a step slower this time. Tom draws his gun and powers up the hill. The guy was gone. According to Tom, it was literally as if he had disappeared. There was no way he could have escaped normally. To this day, Tom recounts it as an encounter with a very sinister paranormal being. This all took place back in 2006, in the summertime, I think around June. It was in Latvia, a small country by the Baltic Sea in northeastern Europe. I was 13 years old at the time, and I and my sister were both members of this archaeology group. In the summers, they would go and do their digs at certain spots. In 2006, it was Rusnica. In a very remote area deep in the Latvian forests, there were about 30 of us in total, and every morning we would make a 3-kilometer journey to the dig site, including a rowboat ride across a lake to get to the site. Over the course of the weeks we were there, we found old bronze rings, a lot of clay from old pottery, and uncovered where there had been old fortifications and other buildings. It was a continuation of their dig from the previous couple of years, and I believe they were still doing it for the next 2 as well. Me and a few of my friends would often goof around while on these digs. We were young boys, so we had a bad attention span for such work. We would wander off into the forest, playing war and pushing over old trees. We stumbled across carved wood spirits in the forest too, which we thought was odd. After getting back to camp, we were told that there was a wasp nest near a swimming area that we were to use, so we were sent to deal with it with some of the older guys. We dealt with them using deodorant and a lighter. Thinking back, these actions may be what caused what was to come. Later that night, I got up in the morning. I don't know what time it was. I needed to pee, so I stepped out of my tent. I slept alone in my tent. The moon was very large and gave off this great, bright glow. As I'm standing there doing my business, I can hear this strange, growing wind that I can't feel, but I can hear it brushing through the treetops, and I started to have the feeling like I'm being watched from the tree line. It was so dark. I figured I was just a little paranoid and went to sleep. The next day, my sister told me that they heard something rustling around mine in their tent that cast a large shadow from the moon over our tents, and my sister was in the tent next to mine, but she was there with 2 other girls. They were all around 16 or 17 at the time. They were freaked out and were up until the next morning. The following night, I started hearing that strange wind again, and I heard, like, in my head, someone say my sister's name, Metra. It was a quiet, raspy, deep, yet feminine voice. After that, I cursed this thing before bed, yelling duck off and stuff like that because I'm an idiot. I guess I put on headphones so I could not hear anything and went to sleep. I remember waking up the next morning feeling very fresh, like I had had the best sleep of my life. Not long after that, my sister and her friends walked up to me looking very concerned, and that told me that they had heard these voices too, saying my name, her name, and other people's names in the camp, and every time they got a little closer and louder. They said that in the night the being had walked up to my tent at the front entrance, and I had opened the flap and started begging for forgiveness, asking it not to hurt me, and making strange weeping noises. Now I don't remember this, but I believe my sister would not lie about this. She said they were too scared to leave their tent. The night after, things got even more intense, and the voices were louder to the point that this voice screamed my name in that raspy voice, like it was right next to me. Freaked out, I ran out to confront whatever it was, thinking maybe this is someone in the camp ducking with me, and in the tree line, I heard that weird wind and saw a very large, dark mass kind of weaving between the tree line, at least 5 meters tall. I ran back in the tent with my sister and her friends, and we all stayed there till the morning with no sleep, individually hearing these voices calling names. Louder and louder, but only the individual would hear it, not all of us at the same time. Weird. The next day, we did a pagan cleansing ritual to ward off evil spirits using kadikis. It's a type of wood, I'm not sure of the English name right now. By burning it and using the smoke around the campsite, it worked. There were other things that happened, but this is getting quite long, so I will wrap it up. I later found out as the word spread through the camp of what had gone on that the year prior, the same thing had happened to one of the seniors of the camp, and he had freaked out at night and run out of his tent crying because of this voice. The dig was on an old pagan graveyard near the ruins too.